Money never sleeps, pal.
Hey there, this is Pete Townsend from Norio Ventures, and welcome to Money Never Sleeps, a podcast that looks inside the head of entrepreneurs and at what makes them do what they do. This episode of Money Never Sleeps is kindly sponsored by Ireland's fintech and financial services recruitment specialists, Top Tier Recruitment. If you or a colleague need help attracting or retaining great talent for your fintech or financial services company, it is highly advisable that you build a relationship with the team at Top Tier Recruitment. You can find them at toptierrecruitment.com and tell them we sent you. This week, we're catching up with Luke Sully, the founder and CEO of Custody Digital Group, who are providing financial institutions with a single point of governance for securing and managing digital assets. Luke and I connected a little over a year ago, and since then, he and I and his CFO, Lynn McConnell, have been talking every few months, as I'm knee-deep into the digital asset space as it is these days, and they've been considering setting up an Irish operation for Custody Digital. So to keep on the theme our listeners are asking for, which is more about what's happening in Ireland and who's on the way here, let's jump right in to this week's episode of Money Never Sleeps.
Money never sleeps, pal.
Here we go again. Welcome to Money Never Sleeps. We're recording today from the home studio, and we're on with Luke Sully, the founder and CEO of Custody Digital Group, who provides a secure, scalable, and regulated institutional-grade platform for digital asset services, starting with custody. Welcome to the show, Luke.
Hi, Pete. Long-time listener, first-time caller. It's nice to be here.
Awesome. Glad to have you on. We were introduced by Colin Platt.
No, I was thinking that this morning. How do we actually get in touch? And I think it was actually Kenny in Chicago from West Loop Ventures.
Was it Kenny? Yeah, Kenny Estes. That's right.
That's right.
Okay,
Yeah.
Shout out to Kenny. I'll be talking to him tomorrow. He got in touch with me, or I got in touch with him last year when I was on a road trip to Chicago with a client, and we connected then, and then he happened to be investing in an Irish company called Pipit, and I'm now on their board of directors, so Kenny and I obviously chat frequently. But how did you get connected with Kenny?
Now I'm wondering how I got connected back through. But I lived in Chicago for 5 years. So and actually Chicago was the place where I started to get an understanding about Bitcoin. So I think it was just through the crypto community in Chicago that got introduced there. So and I met him kind of Q1 last year when I was there for a few months. So yeah, good guy.
Yeah, he is, and he inspired me to grow a beard. So been working on that since Christmas. He did a road trip back in, it would have been December of 2018. He did a road trip here before Christmas, and he met a bunch of folks, and there were just so many interesting connections from that road trip that Kenny did to Dublin and then to London because his wife is English. Yeah, that was fun. So just wanted to kind of start off with your backstory, Luke. And I think one of the first things we talked about when you and I first chatted was your second name, Sully, which obviously you are English, right?
I am. Yeah.
You are. Sully, I remember, is the name of a metro stop in Paris. But so maybe some French heritage there. But also one of the most important things is that Sully, to me, is an Irish-American name, which is short for Sullivan. When you talk about your buddies, Sully and Murph, you're going down to the pub with, right?
Yeah.
So, but no, anyway, just give me the rundown on your backstory and how you got to this point, yeah?
Yeah, so it turns out I think I do have some French heritage, but being a Brit, that's not something that you tend to talk about too much publicly. So I actually a quarter Welsh, so there was definitely some Celt. There's some Celtic roots there. But I had got into, so I was living in the US. I lived in Chicago for 5 years, and I've always had, my career has always been focused around security in various forms throughout the kind of 20 plus years that I've been in the workforce. Got into Bitcoin, I think it was in 2013, and it kind of, I stumbled across it because I think two people mentioned it to me in the space of 1 week. And I started to look at it a little bit more deeply, thought it was a very interesting concept, decided to take a look a little bit more closely. And there was a Bitcoin conference coming up. I think it was in Vegas, like, 2-3 weeks later. So I took my boss and said to him, look, we really need to look at this thing. This absolutely fascinating piece of technology here. So he kind of looked at me sideways and said, well, I'm not really sure you know what you're talking about. And I said, well, there's a conference in Vegas. And he said, okay, well, let's go. So
why not? Yeah, it's Vegas, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think that was the only reason. But and so a 2013 a Bitcoin conference was pretty wild and wacky, and I think we got greeted at the door by an elderly gentleman in his 60s wearing a pink tutu and a cowboy hat with 2 Labradors. And he kind of looked us up and down and said, it's great to see the suits are finally in the room. And I just thought, well, this is fantastic. I mean, this is pretty crazy. And yeah, I think so that kind of started the journey, really. And then, a couple of years later, we're talking about, illicit finance using cryptocurrencies. And I referenced back to the folks I was speaking with in the room. I said, if you'd seen what the industry looked like 2 years ago, you wouldn't be worried about this at all. And then, 2016 was with IBM, and they looked at kind of holistically this gigantic, blockchain opportunity that they were looking at, and then right through to today, and starting CDG. So it's been a real roller coaster, but just fun and fascinating in equal measure.
Yeah, you came to it at a very interesting time with, yes, pink tutus. Back in 2013, I think the Bitcoin pizza, I think was 2011, 2012 maybe.
Yeah,
that hit the news where someone bought pizza with Bitcoin for something like, $50 million worth of Bitcoin in today's terms, right? So most expensive pizza ever.
Yeah.
Getting into it then, and we've talked about this with a number of guests on the show, Luke, that being in this space, whether you call it kind of what it's morphed into now on a more of a global basis, is really digital assets, distributed ledger technology, cryptocurrency being one part of that, blockchain being another part of it, and that it's almost dog years, right? So if you're in this space, it's take that times 7. For those of our listeners that aren't familiar with the multiplier for dog years. It's a very unique space, but becoming incredibly, and has become incredibly important now on the global stage as well for a number of reasons. So just kind of interested in your security background and, going through the years from PwC to IBM, where you were the first global blockchain lead for security, and then doing some consulting with emergent technology. Obviously, this kind of learning that you've had about how digital assets work, but also your very firm grounding in tech security. Those two together are pretty valuable and pretty interesting, yeah?
Yeah, I think it's definitely helped. Yeah, the nature of the threat doesn't necessarily change because you use a blockchain. And there are some, consistent factors around, how you manage to secure a system, and you're talking about data at rest and data in transit, and some of those are consistent themes throughout. So yeah, that's definitely been helpful. But the market has grown exponentially, and you've seen, I think it was something like $9 billion of theft of cryptocurrencies last year alone, and that's like 100% increase on the year before that. So it's kind of still rich, fertile breeding ground for criminal illicit activity, not using crypto, but stealing crypto. And so, we started CDG really to solve that problem, solve 2 problems. One was we wanted to protect institutions from digital asset theft, and we wanted to build critical infrastructure that institutions could use safely. And when you try and solve those 2 problems, the overlap of the Venn diagram, starts with custody. And so that was a really kind of powerful starting point for us to build a business. But, and I think that's kind of, if you look at the Andreessen Horowitz school of, how to build a business, if you try and solve a big problem in a really big market, then you have a great opportunity to build a really scalable business. And that's kind of what we saw with CDG.
Absolutely. Given your backstory, Luke, and given where the market is right now, it makes a lot of sense. But from a kind of more of a personal perspective, taking the leap and becoming an entrepreneur, what do you think it is inside you that is the why, right, for you and why you're doing this?
I found, speaking to other founders, that everybody has very personal journeys as to why they start their own business. And for me, my dad built his own businesses, and so kind of that founder has always been a founder in the family. So that kind of helps, and you understand the journey there. But I think you, as a founder, you want to, certainly for me, you want to be able to, you have a vision as to how you think you can do things and how you think you can solve problems and help create a better way of doing things, or serving a market that you can see that other people can't. And it's just an itch that you have to scratch. I mean, it's the Jerry Seinfeld quote where, starting a business is like being a murderer. It doesn't matter how many people tell you shouldn't do it, you're probably going to do it.
I've heard. That's a great one. I'm going to reuse that.
Yeah, I mean, and that's it. And I think everybody has the capacity to start and build, but you never really know what the next week, month, year is going to look like. So you have to be able to accept a certain amount of chaos in your life, and how you build a business isn't always as linear as you would like. So there's a huge amount of resilience that you have to draw on a fairly regular basis. But, being a founder is also just about getting really good people around you, making sure they're all aligned as to why they're involved, and aligning what they want to do with, the vision and the objective of the company. And I think if you can align everybody's perspectives and interests around that core theme, it'll make your life easier. I think that's probably one of the tips, one of the things that I've learned, and working hard on making sure that everybody's aligned, and then they can pull in and do the best. But team culture is also really, really important as well. Just some of the softer dynamics of building a business are really important.
And where are you building the team, Luke?
Well, like most kind of modern technology companies, we're fairly distributed. I think we're across 4 different time zones.
Okay.
Predominantly, we're in the UK, and then East Coast and West Coast of the US. So the nature of work's definitely changed in the last 20 years. If you look at some of the big corporates now, they're actively making sure that folks work from home or have high degrees of connectivity, but don't necessarily need to be in the same building. Yeah. And I think that's kind of how it works. We're also basing our operations out of Ireland. We spend a lot of time, as you know. I mean, we talked about this a year ago. Yep. I think it was
we did.
Ireland for us just became more and more attractive as a place to base our operations, and so we're pretty excited about Ireland.
That's great. And what were some of the factors that went into kind of making that decision about Ireland?
Some fairly obvious ones and not so obvious ones, I'd like to think. The Irish regulator has a very good reputation, definitely a tier 1 regulator. And so that, I think, provides a lot of reassurance to the market. And we know that we'll be well looked after, one of the regulator. I think the tax incentives, I think the focus on STEM in Ireland over the last period of time has been really important, and the tax treatment of companies that want to do that. But I think as well, if you look through kind of certain recent history, countries that have been kind of financially innovative tend to have high degrees of geopolitical dominance. And there are pockets of history where that definitely plays out. And I think that really does, potentially could stand Ireland in really good stead over time. And when people here in London say to me, well, what with Brexit and everything, who does London compete with for immediate tech talent? And I have to say, Dublin doesn't get talked about enough, but every time we've been over there, the place is just humming, and so it's a really exciting place to be as well.
Yeah. I mean, Finn Murphy from Frontline Ventures, we covered one of his blog posts in an episode, probably about 5-6 episodes ago, and talking about how he values and how he assesses startups. He wrote one recently, just in the last couple of weeks, another one just on Ireland, right? And how things are developing here. And he talked about it kind of being on the second generation now, right? Where I'm on, I was in town this morning working through a few different meetings and walking past the new HubSpot headquarters, right? It's massive. It's huge. And just thinking about it from that perspective, in the last 20 years, some of these companies that were just small, buzzing startups are now mid-sized to large corporations in their own right. And all of those folks that kind of grew up in those businesses, and whether they were second or third or fourth in command, now are launching out and starting up their own businesses and taking some pretty good tech talent with them from some of these bigger places. So while I think Ireland still, from a university education perspective, are still putting some of those programs in place, just this phenomenon, like you said, around financial innovation and the geopolitical angle, which I think is quite interesting, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think what people don't realize is that, really good startups get spun out of other startups, right? So you look at the kind of, as you said, there are folks that will be working in high growth technology companies that understand the playbook and then understand the risk, well, have a finer sense of risk appetite, can take risks, understand calculated risks, and then put teams together and go and build companies. And so that provides a really long tail that I think Ireland will start to enjoy over the next period of time. So yeah, I think it all points in a really good direction. And I hate to say it, but it kind of helps that it's an English speaking country. And it's a short hop to New York, and a short hop to London, which is two of the biggest financial centers in the world. So yeah, it's good.
Yeah, I wouldn't be shy about saying yes, the importance of it being an English-speaking country. And I was always very self-conscious about that myself, that I worked for a French bank for BNP Paribas for 10 years. And there was a lot of times where I was the only one in the room where I only spoke one language, right? And that always made me feel a bit, geez, I really got to do better there. Because when you're working with big teams and where you can only speak your own language and not their language, things get lost in translation, and it's harder to manage teams and build cultures. So anyway, you mentioned regulatory a couple of minutes ago, Luke. How are you managing the ongoing regulatory developments with regards to how digital assets are being treated in a regulatory scope?
Oh, I mean, we're dealing with it very carefully on a daily proactive basis. And we have some great expertise on the team. So, one of my colleagues is a former regulator herself with the UK banking regulator, and that provides us with a great deal of insight. So, regulation on both sides of the pond right now, as it relates to digital assets, is very kind of whack-a-mole. So they tend to pop up, jurisdiction by jurisdiction. And then you have these top-down standards which are starting to come down through FATF, which are being implemented piecemeal, but in a relatively consistent fashion as they do get rolled out. So we have both kind of bottom-up and top-down. And then I think a critical success factor in this space will be how companies manage regulation, not only like making sure that they are compliant, but also using regulation as a kind of competitive advantage. If you can get it right and you can read the tea leaves properly, it allows you to work across jurisdictions that give you a broader palette and broader client base. And so that's kind of one of the early decisions that we took, is to take regulation head on. And everybody is within the team are very proactive about understanding, reading, and we've made some bets on where we think regulation is going to be. So, we've been, I think, one of the first to put in an expression of interest in Germany. And with Germany, that will lead into the Netherlands and other jurisdictions around northern Europe. Then on top of that, obviously we're in Ireland and understanding how that works as well. But we did a months and months of analysis in the US as well. So that in itself is, I think we're in a good spot. We've met a lot of the banking commissioners in the various states, so we have we've built a network of relationships as well to help us understand how and where this is going. So, but it's like most things, the regulation follows the technology, and that's always been the case. And regulators are, I think, engaged in a really meaningful, substantive way now with across different technologies, and they're very receptive to understanding and hearing about new business models. So I think I think that's been a very positive step forward, as has the number of regulatory sandboxes which are starting to emerge. Yep. And that's been it's more of a phenomenon over here than in the US. I think Nevada is probably one of the only that we're aware of where there's a kind of a regulatory sandbox which is being stood up. And Nevada is a key jurisdiction for us in the future, so we keep an eye on that. So yeah, it's been it's been really interesting, that angle.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, I work with a number of different companies in this space, and what I generally always say to them is that, when you're thinking about your regulatory future, just think about if financial services that you're providing for digital assets, just imagine that those are being done for traditional assets.
Yeah.
Right. Whether that's equities, bonds, cash, other currencies. Think about what type of regulatory licensing you would need for that, and what does your organization or your business need to look like in order to achieve that regulatory authorization. You don't need to go out and spend all the money, right, to go get a MiFID license if your business is not yet covered and the activities that you're running are not yet covered under MiFID.
Yeah.
But it eventually will be, right?
Yeah.
So, strive for that and start building your business around some of that. Just on digital assets, just for a number of folks, that may be a new term. How do you break that down, and how do you break down the different verticals of digital assets in terms of kind of your go-to-market strategy, really, Luke, and what types of digital assets do you see your custody services being aligned for to best look after first?
Yeah, I think so. From a technology perspective, there's not a huge amount of difference between how we custody digital assets and cryptocurrencies. Right now, the market tends to sit in the cryptocurrency space. So out of the 1,500 cryptocurrencies there are, I think 90% of that market cap sits only within, 15 coins. And within that, yep, Bitcoin is the kind of gorilla in the room. So that's really where the space is right now. If you're an asset manager or a hedge fund or a trading firm, custody is both a growing security need, but also I think a future regulatory obligation. But the security token space we see as being exponentially bigger over time than actually cryptocurrencies. So the World Economic Forum, I think, has estimated that in the next 20 years, traditional securities will essentially be tokenized and held, yep, and traded across a blockchain, and that represents a 100x larger opportunity than cryptocurrencies currently offer, with more regulatory certainty as well. So I think we're still seeing the kind of green shoots of that. I think the Middle East is moving quite fast on the kind of first shoe to fall. I think is mostly tokenized real estate. So essentially, you can create tokens that represent ownership in a large piece of commercial real estate. So you have fractional ownership, provides a great deal more liquidity in the market if you can trade it across in secondary markets.
I think one of the big ones. I think one of the big ones there from history over the last number of years has been elevated returns. Yeah, which is, I think, St. Regis out in, Colorado, the ski resort outside of Vail, and the tokenization of real estate that they undertook. And they raised only, I think, about $17 million with that. But still, that was kind of a first big one on being able to take a real asset and produce a digital version of that, or at least digital version of the ownership of it, which was pretty interesting. So do you kind of see that as your bread and butter, the emerging security token market, for at least a go-to-market type strategy?
Yeah, for sure. I think a lot of the security token issuance platforms are, looking for organizations and looking for opportunities to tokenize securities. As a custodian, you tend to work with the issuers, historically anyway. So,
Yep.
so for us, we see it as a fairly greenfield kind of opportunity outside of the cryptocurrency space. Yeah. And certainly outside the US. I think the US right now is, again, predominantly focused on cryptocurrencies, and then, the futures products that are
Yep.
being offered out on the East Coast. And so that's kind of where I think a lot of the new money is going.
Okay. On the topic of money, Luke, let's just talk about that for a second. Do you, from the perspective of getting to market, do you have what you need right now to really be able to open up that revenue tap with customers?
I don't think I think it's dangerous to have too much money as a startup. And we
Yeah, it is. It is.
I think I definitely don't fall into that category of having too much
Okay.
money.
Okay. Well, it's like the ICO bros from 2017, 2018 that, having that Lamborghini in the driveway doesn't give you much of a push to get up and work on a Saturday, right?
Yeah, yeah. So I think it's fairly healthy to be pushing the business forward, as fast and aggressively as you can, and find ways to do it on a limited budget until you can. And I think investors now are a lot more mindful of the industry versus a couple of years ago, where folks were just signing checks left, right, and center, and the money was easy. I don't think that led to many good results, and we're just seeing the kind of fallout from that now. So that shakeout's generally positive. I think the folks that are still going and the companies that are starting up now tend to be higher. I hate to say it, but potentially higher quality teams, with strong, good sources of capital behind them, and their path to revenue is very clear. So we're launching our beta next month, and we've managed to do that very, very efficiently, and that's been applauded by the investors that we have and we speak to. So we're very grateful that we get that recognition. We're also we believe there are a couple of really interesting, immediate revenue opportunities for us in the custody space that we're about to launch in the market soon. So hopefully we should have some good news that we'll be able to talk about then. I think sort of, again, I don't want to talk too much about, everybody else, but I think philosophically, I think it's important that you have good capital behind you, and that generally comes with lots of good conditions and milestones to keep you honest, and that's a healthy relationship to get you to grow and scale a sustainable business.
Yeah, absolutely. When you have those milestones kind of pegged into your agreement with your investors, that means what you're going to get is that active role by them in terms of the board, right?
Yeah.
And that you will get that presence, you will get that, hopefully that advisory and guidance coming from people who are obviously interested in making sure you do hit those milestones, right? Because they're not just making an investment of X million and saying, haha, I told you so, if you don't hit those milestones, and stepping away, right?
Right.
Their money's gone. So they want you to hit those milestones. So I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I don't see that sort of negative stereotype play out where everybody's trying to play gotcha. Like, I think if good investors you want good investors to support you to grow the business, and they can provide their expertise, and so that measured approach, I think, is very valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. So beta product next month, and then also looking at obviously boots on the ground here in Ireland at some stage in the next year or so.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I think we only announced the beta 2 weeks ago, and we've been we've been honestly kind of inundated with interest and folks signing up. So whoever said to me that custody, there's too many custody providers out there, or that it's already been sewn up, like I'm not seeing that at all. Quite the opposite, actually. I think folks are really interested in trying to find the right solution for them. I think folks are worried about concentration risk, so we're naturally looking to diversify their custodial provider set. I think so. Yeah, I think ease of use is a big buying criteria, as is security and insurance and regulation. So I don't think the problem has been solved, to be honest with you. So we're really excited about what we're bringing to market in the next month or so.
Absolutely. I can't wait to see it. I won't mention the name of one of them that I've seen recently that is a newer player, somewhat in custody, but they've got a fantastic user experience. I didn't even obviously open an account. It was just being on their website and being able to see how they're doing it. And I expect that you guys are going to go a little bit above that. So but pressure's on, right? Pressure's on. I'll share the name with you afterwards, though.
Yeah.
Just in terms, Luke, of what you've learned so far being a startup founder, you're about 18 months in since you launched the business, yeah?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. What are some of the things you've learned so far about being a founder?
I think it's a constant surprise, to be honest with you, because each day is slightly different and brings with it a set of challenges that you may not have expected before. I think it's kind of the analogy I use is like climbing a mountain. It's always best to kind of keep looking up. I think the moment you start looking down, just to give yourself a pat on the back about how far you've come, it can look a bit scary. So I think it's best to keep putting one foot in front of the other. It's definitely the most rewarding thing I've ever done, undoubtedly.
Absolutely.
And that gives you, I think, a sort of sense of inner confidence over time and your ability to kind of handle issues, right? There are always issues that come up, but they are very few that are too difficult to manage. I think you can work through a lot of stuff, and you need a lot of support as well, right? So I think it's but for me, I think being a founder is really one of the kind of ultimate challenges and kind of ultimate rewards. So it's great. I love it, despite how much I complain sometimes over coffee about how tired I am.
Yeah. That reminds me of Graham Rodford from Archax, where we had him on last year, and he's talking about he absolutely loves it, and this is easier for him than it was working in a corporation.
Yeah.
Right. So some people are just naturally geared towards that. What you said though about trudging up the mountain and not stopping to admire the view, right? Or not even looking down to see how far you came. There is that point of admiring the view just for a second, right? When I used to run marathons back in the day, I remember the one time I ran the Dublin Marathon about 20 years ago. I am running along, I don't know, it's about halfway through, and I'm just staring down at the road, and some guy yells my name because it's written onto my T-shirt, Pistol Pete, right? And he says, Pistol Pete, look up, don't look at the ground. And he's yelling at me just to keep my head, and keep my eyes focused on the horizon while I'm running. Yes, looking straight ahead and looking where you're going. I don't think I ever turned around once during that marathon to see how far I came. So I do get that. And it's a great analogy. When you do have those gut punches of a day, though, who do you lean on?
Oh, I mean, it's you lean on your team, right? So if you have a bad day, it's usually shared amongst the team as a good days. But family and friends and having a really good, it sounds super cliche, but having a really good support network around you is really important. I think it would have been incredibly difficult to do this completely by myself, without a strong network and family and friends, and loved ones. So, but you usually shake it off pretty quickly now. Like I said, I think the analogy I use is sort of it's like life in the NBA. You lose a game, you have a beer. You go home, you get up the next day. If you win a game, You have 2 beers. But you get up the next day, and I think that's really the key. So, but yeah, there are tough days, right? And I think that no doubt, and those tough days are in the early days of a business. They tend to be kind of mission critical days, right? So. You assess the growth of the business as to the sometimes on will this problem, if this problem goes wrong, will it tank the business? And I think in the earlier days they were all fairly mission critical issues, but now that I think the business is moving, we're a little bit more resilient. We can absorb some of that pressure. But yeah, the NBA analogy always kind of stuck with me, and it does ring true.
It absolutely does. It can make the analogy to baseball as well. I think it was Manny Ramirez, who was a quirky guy playing for the Boston Red Sox years ago. his thing was just turn the page, right? Tomorrow's a new day, new ball game, new opponent. Let's just get on with it. And whether we won or lost yesterday, turn the page. So with the last question, Luke, tell me, what's one thing that people wouldn't expect to know about Luke Sully?
That's a great question. Well, I lived in Latin America for many years, and so I've been a student of left-wing guerrilla movements, 1952 to 1995, as part of my life. So I think my ability to dance merengue, albeit badly, I think is probably one of the things that people wouldn't expect to know about.
That's awesome. And are you wearing a Che Guevara t-shirt while you're doing that?
I do have I have quite a lot of linen in my closet, which obviously living in London, you never get to see. But yeah, I can pull out a beret and a cigar with the best of them.
There you go. And where did you learn the merengue? In Latin America? What country are you living in?
I lived in Cali in Colombia. So
wow.
For students of the Narcos TV show, the Cali cartel was the predominant force in Cali when I lived there, amongst many other crazy things, but. Latin America is a pretty special place. Holds a pretty special place for me.
Yeah. My wife and I traveled around South America years ago, and Buenos Aires felt like home for me.
Yeah.
My dad lived there in the late 50s and early 60s, and there was just something about the place that just really fit for me, and I loved it. And we did Chile, we did Bolivia, had a good time. It was a fantastic part of the world to check out. It
really is, yeah. Definitely different. Like the lifestyle is very different. It's a lot more vibrant. So yeah, I'm with you. I think it's fantastic.
All right. Well, Luke, we're going to close it there. Thanks so much for coming on to the show. And best of luck for getting Custody Digital off the ground, getting that beta product out there, opening up the tap, and running hard towards ultimate success.
Thanks, Pete. Appreciate your time. Thanks for the questions.
Awesome. Thank you.
Money never sleeps, pal.
That does it for this week, folks, and thanks to Luke for opening up his mind to help us figure out why he does what he does. Links and show notes for this episode are on moneyneversleeps.ie, so check us out online. Remember, if you or a colleague need help attracting and retaining great talent for your fintech or financial services company, it is highly advisable that you build a relationship with the team at Top Tier Recruitment, as they really know their stuff. You can find them at toptierrecruitment.com. Also, thanks to Conan Brophy from Create Sound for editing this podcast. As for me, I increase the odds of startup success. Get in touch through the contact page on norioventures.com. You can check out what Owen Fitzgerald is up to these days on Twitter at OwenFitzgerald9. Finally, till next time, thanks for listening. See ya!